Totemist.
The Owls of Appalachia. It's fascinating how the mind processes trauma. Some experiences burrow deep into your consciousness, fundamentally changing how you view the world. My encounter in the Appalachian Mountains last autumn was one of those moments, a night that made me realize how the path to self-discovery sometimes leads us through unexpected darkness. I'd spent the previous year watching my life unravel. Sarah and I had tried counseling, of course. We'd made genuine attempts to rebuild what 15 years of marriage had slowly eroded. But sometimes, two people simply grow in different directions, like trees reaching for separate patches of sunlight. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between bills and a takeout menu, and I remember staring at them for hours, wondering how such a small stack of papers could represent the end of something that had once felt eternal. The signs had been there for years, I suppose. The way our conversations had gradually shortened, becoming mere exchanges of logistical information. How we'd stopped sharing the little moments, those small, seemingly insignificant observations we once delighted in telling each other. The separate vacations that started as practical scheduling solutions, but evolved into unspoken relief. By the end, we were like two people sharing a waiting room, politely acknowledging each other's presence while anticipating different destinations. That's when questions started creeping in. Who was I without the relationship that had defined my adult life? What did I want from the remaining chapters of my story? The corporate job I'd once been proud of suddenly felt hollow. My apartment, with its carefully curated furniture to reflect my very self, seemed more like a hotel room than a home. Every morning, I'd catch myself staring at my mirror, trying to recognize the person looking back at me. I started making small changes at first, grew a beard, traded my designer suits for more casual wear, took up meditation, though my mind refused to quiet itself. But these surface-level adjustments felt like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. I needed something more drastic, more fundamental. So I did what countless lost souls have done before me. I went looking for answers in nature. The Appalachian Trail seemed like the perfect place to reset, to strip away the complexities of modern life and rediscover something authentic about myself. I packed light, a tent, some trail mix, basic supplies. The weight of my backpack felt reassuring against my shoulders as I set out that morning. I was free to explore the world. I was free to explore myself. The forest welcomed me with open arms. Countless trees stretched toward the sky, their leaves painting the canopy in brilliant shades of red and gold. There was something profoundly comforting about their presence. These silent giants that had witnessed centuries of human struggles yet remained steadfast. They made me think about stability, about putting down roots that could weather any storm. The trail wound through valleys and along ridgelines, each vista more breathtaking than the last. I passed a few other hikers early in the day, a retired couple who'd been hiking the trail for years, a group of college students with oversized backpacks and fresh enthusiasm. But as the day progressed and I ventured deeper into the wilderness, the encounters became less frequent until it was just me, my thoughts, and the rhythmic crunch of leaves beneath my boots. As dusk approached, I found a small clearing that seemed perfect for camp. The setting sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows that danced across the forest floor. I set up my tent with methodical care, allowing the simple physical task to quiet my mind. A small circle of stones formed a natural fire pit. Previous hikers had clearly found this spot as inviting as I did. The fire came to life easily, crackling and popping as it consumed the dry wood I'd gathered. I sat there, legs crossed, watching the flames dance. It struck me as oddly poetic how fire could destroy and yet create such beauty in its movement. Perhaps that's what this year had been for me, a necessary burning away of old growth to make room for something new. Solitude felt different there than it did in my empty apartment, where the silence was oppressive, a constant reminder of absence. The quiet of the forest felt alive, full of purpose and presence. I found myself thinking about Sarah, but for the first time in months, the thoughts weren't tinged with bitterness or regret. We'd had good years together, built something meaningful, even if it hadn't lasted forever. Maybe that was enough. The first owl's call barely registered in my consciousness, a gentle hoo-hoo floating through the darkening forest, as natural as the wind in the trees. When a second owl responded from a different direction, I smiled. There was something peaceful about bearing witness to their conversation, like overhearing an ancient language I wasn't meant to understand. But then a third owl joined in, and a fourth, and a fifth. The calls began overlapping, creating an unsettling chorus that seemed to surround my small campsite. Each new voice added another layer to this unsettling choir. I'd spent enough time outdoors to know this wasn't natural behavior. Owls are typically solitary creatures, territorial. This gathering was different. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps there was a particularly good hunting ground nearby. Maybe some environmental factor made them congregate. But as the calls grew closer, more frequent, my instincts told me that something was terribly wrong. The darkness between the trees seemed to pulse with hidden movement. The fire, which had felt so comforting earlier, now seemed to cast more shadows than light. Each flicker revealed new shapes in the darkness, shapes that didn't quite match the forest's natural geometry. The owl calls continued to multiply, dozens of voices now, creating a cacophony that made my skin crawl. The very air felt charged with anticipation, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. When I began packing my gear, I told myself I was being rational. There's no shame in listening to your instincts, in removing yourself from a situation that feels wrong. But my hands were shaking as I rolled up my sleeping bag, and I kept glancing over my shoulder at the impenetrable darkness beyond the firelight. The owl calls had created a wall of sound that seemed to be closing in, growing more intense with each passing moment. That's when I heard it. A sound that haunts my dreams to this day. A deep, resonant screech that seemed to vibrate through my bones. It was like the other owl calls, but impossibly amplified, as if coming from something far larger than any owl had a right to be. The canopy above my camp shuddered, and a shadow passed over the stars, silently blotting out the stars. I ran. I abandoned most of my gear, taking only what was already in my hands. I stumbled and scraped myself countless times, but the sound of massive wings behind me kept me moving. Each thunderous wing beat sent vibrations through the ground, spurring me to push harder, run faster. The night became a blur of panicked motion. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. When I finally broke through the tree line onto a marked trail, I was miles from my original campsite. The sky was beginning to lighten with the first rays of dawn, and the normal sounds of the forest were returning. But I didn't stop running until I reached the ranger station. Looking back now, I realize that night changed me in ways I'm still trying to understand. The divorce didn't seem like the end of the world anymore. There's something terrifyingly liberating about a wild darkness that puts your personal struggles into perspective. I've since rebuilt my life in ways I never expected. Found a new job teaching survival skills to troubled youth. Bought a small cabin on the edge of town. Started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. The divorce is still there in my history, but it no longer defines me. In a strange way, I'm grateful for that night in the mountains. It gave me a new perspective on what truly matters. I still hike, still seek solitude in nature, but I stick to the marked trails now, and I always head back before dusk. Some questions, I've learned, are better left unasked. Some answers are better left undiscovered. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I hear an owl call in the distance. A single, natural hoot that should be comforting in its normalcy. But my heart still races, and I find myself counting the seconds, waiting to see if another will answer. 32. Have you ever had one of those moments that you look back on and think, man, that could have gone a whole different way? Like a bad way? That's how I feel every time I remember this one camping trip me and my buddy Mike took a few years back. At the time, we were both in our early 30s. Him with a new baby at home, and me still trying to get my life together. Our tradition was to head out to the woods a couple of times a year, just to get away from everything for a bit. No phones, no responsibilities, just some beers and hanging out around the campfire. So, this one time, we picked a spot pretty close to town, not our usual place out by the lake. Mike didn't want to be too far from his wife and baby in case anything came up. I wasn't thrilled and felt like it defeated the point of getting away, but I understood where he was coming from. Didn't want to be a jerk about it. Anyway, we pulled up to the site right as the sun was going down. It was a decent spot, a clearing in the pines, a little stream nearby. We got all set up, the fire going, cracking open a couple of cold ones. For a bit, it felt good, normal. But then, as we started to unwind, I began feeling off, dizzy, kind of short of breath. I'd had this ache in my chest and arm all day, but I figured it was just from sleeping weirdly or something. Out there, though, it was harder to ignore. I didn't say anything to Mike because I didn't want to be a downer. We had been just chilling, shooting the breeze, when all of a sudden, we started hearing these noises. Snapping branches, rustling in the bushes, that kind of thing. At first, we joked, like, maybe it's Bigfoot coming to the party, but it kept going. It started to feel like something was circling our site, watching us. Mike grabbed the flashlight and checked it out, but he didn't see anything. No tracks, no animal eyes reflecting back. Both of us felt weirded out by then. We decided to forget it and go for a hike, try to shake it off. But the deeper we went into the woods, the weirder it got. We found dead birds, like something had ripped them apart. And there were these marks on the trees, like claw gouges, but way too big to be from any animal we knew of. By then, I was feeling like garbage, my chest hurting more and more. As we were walking back to our site, it went fully dark. The kind of dark where you can barely see your hand in front of your face. At first, I thought it was just the usual creepiness of being out in the woods at night. But the air felt different. Heavy. It got harder and harder for me to breathe, like there was something pressing in on me. Mike kept asking what was wrong, but I was so irritated by the feeling and the weird things we'd seen that I snapped at him to mind his own business. He backed off for a second, but as we kept walking, he started up again, saying that he was my friend and it wasn't fair to shut him out. I wasn't in the right headspace to deal with it, though. I just wanted to get back to the site. Then, we finally made it back. And the site we walked into was like something out of a nightmare. Our tent was shredded, torn up like it had been through a storm. Our gear was scattered all over the place, like someone had just tossed it around. The fire was almost completely out, mostly just ash at this point. And the smell, geez. You ever caught a whiff of something that's been rotting for a while? It was like that, but worse. Metallic almost. Then we saw it. Right in the middle of our wrecked camp was a deer carcass, or what was left of it. The body was torn open, and its head was completely gone, like something had ripped it off without a trace. It didn't make sense. It felt like a message, but we couldn't figure out what it meant. All we knew was that someone, or something, had done this, and we were the next ones. Before we could even fully process what we were looking at, the noises from earlier started up again. Only, this time, they were louder and more frequent. The rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs, each sound sharp and deliberate. Then, out of nowhere, a bird swooped into the camp, flapping wildly and screaming in frantic, desperate shrieks. Its wide, unblinking eyes circled around, its cries tearing through the air like something driven mad. Mike, looking frustrated and scared, told me he'd had enough and wanted to start packing up. He said if I was going to be an asshole about opening up to him, he wasn't sticking around for any more of it. As much as I wanted to snap back, I couldn't deny that we both felt the same way. Whatever was going on around us was freaking us out, and it wasn't worth pushing it any further. So, we started packing up. As we packed, we shouted, hoping to scare off whatever was watching us, but the noises didn't stop. We tried to move faster, but then the pain in my chest went from bad to, oh no. It felt like someone was squeezing my heart, and my arms went numb. Before I knew it, I hit the ground, hearing Mike yell, but it felt distant, like I was underwater. The next thing I remember, I was waking up in the back of an ambulance. It turned out I'd had a heart attack at just 32 years old. The paramedic said if Mike hadn't given me CPR and kept me alive until they got there, I wouldn't be here anymore. He saved my life. Saved me by choosing that spot, by giving me CPR, and by getting me out of those creepy woods. After everything happened, I asked Mike many times if he saw whatever was making those creepy sounds and gestures, but he always told me to forget about it. So, I don't know if there was something out there, and if there was, what it was. Mike never gave me any details, and I don't know if he knows something or not. Honestly, I don't even know if I want to know. I got the heck out of there and never looked back. But it messed me up, man, especially when I saw a news story a year later about a hiker who got attacked in those same woods. Sometimes I wonder, Did my heart giving out actually save our butts that night? Like, if we'd stayed out there longer, would we have been the next ones to get torn apart? I used to love camping and being out in nature, but now I can't even look at a dang tree without breaking out in a cold sweat. I keep seeing those claw marks and smelling that awful stench. It's like a piece of that night is still stuck in my head and I can't shake it. So now I stick to camping in my living room with a nature doc playing on the TV. It's not the same, but at least I know the only thing lurking outside is my neighbor's cat. And I can live with that. My mother's shadow. I've never shared this story before. Not completely. My therapist suggests that writing about it might help, so here I am. I want to explain why I have trust issues, why I second guess even the most basic interactions. It all goes back to our last camping trip in Maine, 20 years ago. I was 6 then, still collecting rocks in my pockets and believing the world was fundamentally good. Every summer, my parents would take me camping in the dense forests of Maine. It was our tradition, something I looked forward to all year. Mom would pack her special trail mix with extra M&Ms, and Dad would bring his old guitar to play by the campfire. The forest felt like a second home. That particular summer was unusually warm. The air buzzed with dragonflies, and the creek near our campsite sang with countless frogs. I remember because I was obsessed with frogs that year. I'd even named my stuffed frog Herbert after reading about him in a science book at school. On our 3rd morning there, after a breakfast of chocolate chip pancakes, Mom's specialty, I asked if I could go look for frogs by the creek. Mom reminded me to stay within shouting distance, and Dad helped me put on my red rain boots just in case I needed to wade in the shallow parts. The creek was perfect for frog hunting, with lots of smooth rocks and fallen logs where they liked to bathe in the sun, royal creatures that they were. I remember feeling so grown up, exploring on my own. I followed the water's path, carefully stepping from rock to rock, my eyes scanning for any sign of movement. Time has a different quality when you're 6. 1 minute stretches on forever, while hours pass in the blink of an eye. I don't know how long I wandered, following the promise of just one more bend in the creek. When I finally looked up, nothing looked familiar anymore. The trees all seemed taller, closer together. The sunlight filtering through the leaves cast unfamiliar patterns on the forest floor. The creek's happy gurgling suddenly sounded less like music and more like white noise. Fear didn't hit immediately. Mom and Dad had prepared me for such things. If you ever get lost, they'd told me, stay where you are. Don't wander. Stay put and call for help. We'll find you. So that's what I did. I found myself a nice log, sat down, and started calling out, Mom! Dad! I'm over here! I called until my throat felt scratchy. The sun moved across the sky, changing the shadows around me. I hummed songs to myself, counted leaves, anything to stay calm. But as the hours passed, doubt began creeping in. Maybe I'd walked farther than I thought. Maybe they were looking in the wrong direction. Maybe. Then I heard it. Macy, baby, are you there? Mom's voice. Relief flooded through me as I jumped up, calling back, Mom, I'm here, here. She appeared through the trees, and for a moment, everything felt right again. Her hair was pulled back in its trademark messy bun, her green hiking jacket worn but familiar. She hugged me tight, and I breathed in her scent, but something was off in the way she held me. Not wrong exactly, just different. I was so worried, she said, taking my hand. Let's get you back to camp. Your father will be so relieved. We started walking, and that's when the little details began catching my attention. Her socks were white, pristinely white, but I distinctly remembered her pulling on her favorite blue hiking socks that morning. When I asked about it, her explanation came too quickly. Oh, I stepped in a puddle earlier and had to change them. As we walked, she asked me how I'd gotten lost. I told her about following the creek, looking for frogs, losing track of time. She smiled at my story, but something was missing. Mom's smile had always been special because of her dimples. But now her face was smooth, perfect, dimpleless. Other small things kept nagging at me. The way she walked was slightly off rhythm, like someone trying to remember how to do something they'd seen, but never actually done. Her voice had all the right words, but none of the little inflections I knew by heart. It was like looking at a photo that's been edited just enough to make you question your memory of the original. My heart began racing, but I tried to act normal. Every instinct was screaming that something was terribly wrong, but I didn't know what to do. This was my mom, but not my mom. Like someone had studied her very carefully, but missed crucial details. Finally, when I couldn't bear it anymore, I stopped walking. My voice came out quieter than I intended. You're not really my mom, are you? The thing wearing my mother's face went very still. When it spoke again, the voice was different, deeper, resonant, like multiple voices layered together. What gave me away, Macy? I watched in horror as her shadow began to change, stretching and twisting into impossible shapes. Dozens of dark tendrils writhed against the forest floor, reaching toward me. The air turned bitterly cold. I could see me breath in the summer heat. Don't be afraid, it said, standing still with its long shadow stretching endlessly in all directions. This won't take long. Shit. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs felt like rubber, until the forest was a shapeless blur of green and brown, until I heard real voices, my real parents, park rangers, search parties, calling my name. I told them what happened, of course. They said it must be dehydration, exhaustion, and an overactive imagination. We never went camping again. My parents tried, but I refused to go. Sometimes, in violent bursts, I could not explain. Some experiences fundamentally change how you see the world. Now, I find myself studying people's faces, looking for inconsistencies. I notice when someone's laugh doesn't quite match their usual pattern, when their walk is slightly off, when small details don't add up. My friends call me a weirdo. My exes called me paranoid. Sometimes I wonder if I'm still running. Every time I meet someone new, every time I start to trust, I feel that same cold dread creeping up my spine. I watch their shadows, waiting for them to take shape. Because now I know that something can study a person, can learn their mannerisms, their words, their face, but will always miss some crucial detail. My therapist says trauma reframes our perception of safety. She's right, of course, but she hasn't seen what I've seen. She doesn't understand that sometimes monsters wear familiar faces, but I will never forget